In this video, I'm going to be replacing my back patio with a patio stone type patio. You can see the previous owners had made a wood deck on grade. What they did was put 2x4, I guess, sleepers down. They were treated, so they were actually not rotten. And then they put these 2x6s on top of the 2x4 sleepers. Those are pretty much all rotten. You can see that they've replaced some of them. And then it looks like at some point in time they added, it's not a 1x6, it's like a little bit thicker, it's a deck board, but they threw those on top and those are also rotten. So I got basically 2 layers of deck here, which I end up removing off camera. You can see some new boards in there. I got like a little deck and some stairs. I've already taken the stairs out in another video, but you can see what I'm starting with. To remove the deck, I really just used a circular saw, a jigsaw, and a Sawzall, and that took a while, but it came up pretty easily. And I've decided not to use a wooden deck again, not just because it was rotten, but because of the rodent issue as well. There's a lot of mice and stuff that were getting under there, and I didn't want that. So anyway, I removed the deck, stripped down the dirt, and you can see obviously I got a pool, so that's sort of the hard right edge of this. I didn't set up a lot of string line, but a lot of my distances are very short, so I measured sort of where I want the pavers to be on my wall, and I'm using about 1 inch for every 4 feet as my slope. So the house side is going to be 1 inch higher for every 4 feet it is away from the pool. Give or take, there are some differences because it's very much not a square shaped. You can see it kind of goes all over the place. So there is a few different slopes going on. But generally speaking, once I got the topsoil off, the clay was at a pretty good slope, and then I just moved some of the clay around. Ideally, I would have had some heavy equipment come in, but obviously that'd be very expensive and it's difficult to move around the pool and that sort of thing. But I am going to be able to lay about 4.5 inches of gravel before I put in the pavers. So it's a little less than ideal, but I'm going to work with it. It should be fine. It's not a big deal. I do have to put down this fabric first. There is a lot of clay in the area, so having this fabric will prevent the gravel that I'm going to put down on top of the fabric from just punching into the clay when I go to compact it. So this will keep it all together, and it'll make sure that your aggregate doesn't get pushed into the clay and start sinking away on you. Definitely having the fabric is a good idea to help ensure the stability of your gravel once you put that down. So really that's all I did. Got the topsoil off, got the clay to about the slope I wanted, and then just put that geotextile fabric down. And I got 5 cubic meters of 0 to 3/4 gravel, and it's also called granular A. So I've got a whole lot of digging to do and a whole lot of gravel to move. Obviously I'm not going to show it all, and I'm just going to throw this thing in fast motion. But when you're putting the gravel in initially, you want to make sure that the fabric stays where it's supposed to be. For the fabric, I used a massive amount of overlap. So it's like 3 feet of overlap for all the fabric, but I just had a lot of fabric as compared to the amount of patio that I was putting down here. So that is why I went with a massive amount of overlap. So once I get a few wheelbarrow loads in, I just use a regular rake. I don't have anything special here for this project. Really, I'm just using tools that I had around the house. The only thing I went out and bought really was this dump wagon, which I found to be pretty useful overall. And I just keep laying that gravel in, and I'm going for about 1.5 inches to 2 inches before I compact this. So the next day I went out and rented a compactor. I think the daily rental cost on this thing was about $100, but definitely well worth it. You wouldn't be able to get this level of compaction with a hand tamper. It would take forever, and this made pretty short work of it. And it also really did a great job of compacting the granular A gravel. Obviously it's not something that most people have, so renting it for $100 for 24 hours is not a bad deal. Once I'm done this, I'm going to throw another 1 inch or 2 of gravel on top of that, and I'm going to compact it one more time. So I did that off camera, and really what I end up with is the gravel about 2.5 inches from the top edge of the pool, and then obviously slope back towards the house. And I put a red line across the house. You can kind of see it there, about 2.5 inches from the red line in most spots. Some spots a little more, some spots a little less. Now before I start screeding in the sand, I do have some low spots, and I'm going to deal with those pretty easy. I just move the 6-foot level around and just identify any low spot, take a shovel full of gravel, throw it into the low spot, and then use a hand tamper and just smash it down until it's all nice and flat. Pretty easy process. It is time consuming, just like this whole project. For the screed layer, I'm using stone dust. I know that perhaps sand is probably the better thing, but stone dust is being used here because it's really just what's available in the area. I'm not sure why everyone in the area uses stone dust, but it is definitely what is more commonly used. And anyway, that's what I go with. So like I said, I didn't have a full 5 inches to work with. I would have had to get in maybe a bobcat to pull out a bunch of the clay. It was not happening very quickly with the shovel. So I'm only doing a 1/2 inch screed on this, so a little bit less than ideal, but that's okay. And for this, I'm just throwing the stone dust in between some metal bars that I bought, which are obviously 1/2 inch diameter, and then adding the stone dust, and then just using the 6-foot level and just doing it that way. And then to fill in the gap left by the metal bars, I just take a shovel full of the stone dust, put it in the hole, and then use a hand tamper to flatten it down and make sure that everything's nice and flat. Not necessarily level, because obviously it has a slope to it. And putting in the pavers is pretty simple. Obviously you just put it into place, and that is it. Whatever design you want to do, it's very easy once you get going. Obviously you want to make sure that they don't have a bit of a wobble to them and that sort of thing. But other than that, very easy to do. This edging I picked up at, I think, Home Depot. Again, very easy, just cut it to fit. You have to buy some plastic nails separately and just drive those in, and that'll help keep your pavers in place. And to make circles with the bricks, you just cut a wedge on one side. Pretty straightforward. For cutting these things, I think I already did a video on what I was using to cut it, but initially I was using a circular saw for most of this, and you can see that it creates a lot of dust. One of the negative things about not having all the specialty tools is this, and that's the dust that it creates. So a bit later, I do end up using a hose to run water on the brick while I'm cutting through it with the circular saw. And there's a whole bunch of variations on what you might have to cut. And that particular cut was just to fill in one of the ends on the pavers. So this is sort of the main area, the larger area, which ironically was the faster section to do because everything was large bricks. But I do put the polymetric sand in at different times. So I sort of did this as the stage 1, and then I go to do the other side as sort of stage 2 on this. And before doing the polymetric sand, I just make sure all the bricks are level, everything's even, and it looks good visually. And I would say in general, it's a good idea to do a little bit of fine tuning before you put that layer of sand down on your pavers, because obviously once the sand goes in, it kind of locks things in place. So I took about an hour to just fine tune things, make sure everything's sitting how I want it to be sitting. And for the hammer in this, I didn't have a rubber mallet, but I used a dead blow hammer, which is more of a plastic hammer. And it did a good job. It didn't crack the bricks or anything like that. So if you don't have a rubber mallet, I found that a dead blow hammer worked just fine for this purpose. And I don't know why, all the way around the edges, I found that I just went a little bit high, so I had to take that down a little bit to make these things look decent. And that's sort of what I ended up with once I kind of did the whole thing. And you can see this pool is not square to the house. In fact, nothing is square in this project. I would say this is probably the worst shape possible to try and do. And I actually extended this a little bit to go all the way around to the diving board. So I'll just quickly show you how I'm cutting the curve here. Basically, I set the tile down in the shape it needs to go, mark the distance of the open end, and then mark that on the sort of the closed side, which would be the pool side in this case, and then just draw a straight line from that side, which in this case is about 2.5 inches, to the corner of the other side, and then just cut that off again with the circular saw. And you can see this time I'm using some water with the circular saw. Might not be wise with the electricity. Seemed to be okay. I didn't get electrocuted, and I didn't trip the GFCI switch either. So once I got the angle cut for the large paver, I just put the small pavers right where they need to be, and then just trace out 2 more lines for the rest of the curve, and I come up with something that looks like that. Is it perfect? No. I'm not a professional stone cutter, but it did a pretty good job. And to make those side cuts, I ended up using an angle grinder because obviously the circular saw isn't very good at making curved cuts like that. So the angle grinder was much better, and ultimately it did a pretty good job, I thought. Now I'm using, like I said, polymetric sand in all the joints, and I guess it's supposed to prevent weeds and prevent ants and stuff from getting in there. So obviously I've swept off all the little stones and as much of the debris as I could from the patio, and then I really just dump this polymetric sand in here. And one of the issues I've got with this polymetric sand is it really holds on to some of the patio stones. I don't know if there's a bit of a dampness to this that sort of just sucked in that polymetric sand. Some of the rougher pavers seem to really attract that sand, and I do have quite a bit of a time getting the polymetric sand off of some of the pavers. So, but anyway, once you dumped all the sand on the patio, you just sweep it in. Nothing too spectacular about it. If you have a compactor, like one of those vibrating compactors that I used earlier, you can run it on top of this and help shake the polymetric sand into the joints. I don't have that anymore. Obviously my rental ended after one day, but what I do is I just come around with the dead blow hammer and I smack the corners a little bit, and that helps get the sand settled into the cracks a little bit deeper. And then once I'm done sweeping the polymetric sand on it, just take the hose and get it wet. You don't have to get it insanely wet, like it doesn't need to be running off the patio, anything like that. Like even what I got right there is probably a little bit too wet. It just needs to be damp, and it'll soak into the polymetric sand and harden up. And anyway, this is what I ended up with. I think it looks a lot better. Obviously there's still no stairs, but I think generally speaking it looks a lot better than what it used to look like. I still have a lot of yard work to do with the grass, and then coming down the other direction I got that spalling that I need to fix on the side of the concrete there, and then I do need to fix this entire back alleyway, which I think that's going to be a project for next spring. And anyway, this is what it looks like all said and done. I think it's a big upgrade, but it was a lot of work. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.